Hey guys, welcome back to Mo's Game Table. Today we're going to continue the AAR from the strategic surprise scenario from NATO The Cold War Goes Hot. This is game turn 3. Dawn rises on what was to be the final day of this short but brutal conflict between East and West. Well, at least until the next time I set up NATO for another scenario. For now, however, into the final turn we go in what will definitely turn out to be a strategic surprise. NATO earns 2 more points for keeping control of both Lüneburg and Lübeck. The Pact totally ignoring those cities. They're solely concerned with exploiting the seam that is opening in the middle of the NATO defensive line and rushing to cross the Rhine for the automatic victory. So we'll start with the joint reinforcement phase. NATO gets 6 brigades worth of West German reinforcements. The Pact will get the Polish 1st Armor. They will arrive as reinforcements, and the BAF HQ and Polish Front HQ will arrive by rail this turn. The Pact will also get the Czech Front Artillery and Airborne, which will arrive from Sector 3. The Polish P1 and P2T units will arrive from Sector 5. Then we roll on the air campaign table, and the air point roll gives the Pact 5 tactical air points and 1 operational air point. NATO gets 6 tactical and 2 operational air points. Now we get to the supply phase. Denmark remains in supply. The Polish P2T units are out of movement supply, as you can see here. And in the air and sea movement phase, the Pact will attempt to land the 76 guards behind the Belgian unit in Hex 3721. The roll is a 7, adjusted to 6 for landing in the EZOC, and the landing is successful. Then we get to the ground movement phase. The NEGF shifts movement southward towards the center axis of advance that SEGF is trying to open up. The Polish front advances to reinforce the northern segment of the North Ag Baltic front line, hoping to lend some more momentum to punch through the NATO lines if they shift south to follow NEGF's move towards the center. SEGF are pressing through the thinly defended center to split the NATO line, and they plan to lay down air interdiction on either flank to slow the NATO response. The Czech front remains stable with no plans to attack this turn. That front is eerily quiet. Too quiet. Then we get to the helicopter movement segment. The Pact flies in 35G next to the 416 Belgians in 3420 to block them from reacting into 3520. And the troops land safely. 3 flak attacks are avoided on both the inbound and the outbound legs of the flight. Then we get to the recovery phase. All disrupted and out of supply markers are removed now that the 3 out of movement supply Polish units are back in range of the Polish Front HQ. Then we get to the battle planning phase, and the Pact commits to 8 different attacks down the MLR, with no combat chosen for the Czech front. And we'll take a look here at both fronts' combats, and then the overall look at the combats chosen along the line. Then we get to the Warsaw Pact airstrike phase. They have 5 tactical and 1 operational air point to use. They choose to use 4 tactical and 1 operational air point to set up 5 air interdiction zones, as you see here. The intent I had was to create a corridor boundary for the Pact to maneuver units through and limit the response of the NATO forces in order to avoid engagements and move through to the Rhine for the auto victory. 1 remaining tactical air point was used as an airstrike in 3417. The roll was a 6, adjusted to 5, with the -1 for the target being in rough terrain. The result was a D1 asterisk, so the 9-3 Panzer was destroyed and the 19-7 was disrupted. Then we get to the artillery strike segment. The SEGF artillery division sends a barrage against 12 Panzer in Hex 3819. The roll was a 3, adjusted to 2 for the forest, and it resulted in a disruption. Next, we have the combat phase, and we're going to start from top to bottom. The U.S. 2nd Armor in Lüneburg is attacked at 7-1 odds, which then gets adjusted to 6-1 for the minor city shift. Then it goes back to 7-1 for the flank attack bonus, and up to 8-1 for the helicopter support. Good thing the Pact went with the overkill, because the roll was a 1, which results in a D1R1. The U.S. 2nd Armor falls, and with it, so does the city of Lüneburg. British 22-1A is attacked in 2715 and is destroyed by overwhelming numbers. The Soviets advance into the Hex. The Pact is really committing to cleaning out the Hexes now, so they attack the 2 British brigades in 3216 with HQ support. The 5th Para sees this and reacts into the Hex, which fits the stacking limitation of either 4 brigades or 2 divisions. The 5th Para is too weak to affect the odds, but the intent here is to load the Hex up with 3 units to hopefully hold the Soviets in place, since the highest loss rate is 2 units on the CRT. Of course, there could still be retreats of up to 2 Hexes as well, but NATO is desperate to keep the Soviets delayed as long as possible, and there are ways to handle retreats, as you'll see. The attack is now at 4-1, which adjusts to 5-1 with HQ support. Roll is a 4, which is a D1R1 result. The 4-3 armor is destroyed and the 24th armor stays in place as NATO chooses to sacrifice the 5th para to pay for the required retreat of 1 hex from the R1 result. The Soviet advance is stopped. Without the 5th para joining in that battle, the Soviets would be 15 miles closer to their end goal of the Rhine. This is the aftermath of the attack on 19th Panzer in 3417. They were disrupted in the lone Pact airstrike earlier this turn. Already down to half strength and facing assured destruction, NATO throws their first defensive airstrike into the mix to try and hurt the Soviets. They cut the 47th Guards in half in 3317 and disrupt both units in the hex. I removed the disrupted marker for the picture as I was trying to keep track of the units for my notes. You can see the marker off to the right. 19th 7th Panzer is destroyed and 9T 1st Guards tanks rolls into the abandoned hex in 3417. The Belgian cavalry unit in 3520 is attacked at 7-1 odds, and the roll is a 5, which is an A1D2 asterisk R2 result. The Soviets lose the 35th Guards who were in 3419 before being removed, but the Belgian cavalry unit is destroyed and the Soviets will advance into the hex. At the bottom you see the next engagement. The 12th Panzer is already disrupted from the earlier artillery strike in 3819. It is attacked along with the 13th 5th Panzer, and the result of the combat is a CAD-1R1. That destroys the 12th Panzer, but the counterattack roll strikes back at the 27th Guards, disrupting them. The remaining 5th Panzer unit retreats 15 miles in order to link up with the West German 3-Corps HQ. 5th Panzer is grossly outmatched by the Soviets bearing down on them, and they're destroyed with ease, allowing the Soviets to advance into the hex. And the final battle is against the Belgian 1716 unit in 3721, and the Soviets are not leaving anything to chance. They start off with 3-1 odds, and then it adjusts to 5-1 for concentric attack, and then an additional 1 for helicopter support, and 1716 is easily destroyed, allowing the Soviets to advance into the hex. Here you can see the aftermath of the Soviet thrust on day 3. The lead Soviet elements are a mere 45 miles from the goal line. The breakthrough spans 60 miles wide, and with the air interdiction corridors on either flank, at that point I was feeling pretty confident in my Ushanka as the Pact commander, expecting the Soviets to reach and cross the Rhine within the next 2 days. Oh, how wrong I was. Once I swapped out my Ushanka for my NATO commander's hat, a bright light shone upon my hubris and tactical stupidity from the Warsaw Pact side. This proved that even when we play our game solitaire, we can still be surprised at how dumb we can sometimes be, and how we can make ourselves pay for those mistakes. Oh, and by the way, both Soviet helicopters returned safely to base and all units remain in combat supply. And now we go into NATO's turn. The French units in West Germany have advanced past their headquarters range, which is not yet activated but will this turn, so they're currently out of movement supply. The Belgian 416 in Hex 3420 is out of movement supply, and the Canadian 4CMBG is also out of supply, but should move to within range of its parent HQ this turn. NATO has no air and sea movement, and they go right into the ground movement phase. NATO moves the Belgian 416 unit back into supply range of its parent HQ, and consolidates the Belgian line near Dusseldorf. The 2 French armored divisions move up the southern flank of the Belgian line in support as a blocking force against the Soviet Rhine crossing attempt, and move the Canadian 4CMBG to within supply range of the 7th Corps headquarters, which is not pictured here. 2 brigades of the West German 6th Panzer Grenadiers dash across the wide open plains of East Germany, as the Pact units had been collapsing in towards the center of the line and ignoring their flanks. Are they speeding towards Berlin as a relief force, or will they take a stab at Schwerin, which makes for a juicy target all by its lonesome? Remember, NATO can turn the tide, as the rule states, by controlling 2 Warsaw Pact cities and gain an automatic victory. Schwerin is a mere 45 miles from Rostock, so both cities could be taken here with some good luck rolls. This is when I started chuckling as the NATO commander and simultaneously broke out into a nervous sweat as the Pact leader. I totally ignored my flanks. Never ignore your flanks. And here you can see I moved up the Landshut HQ as well as the 11th Panzer Grenadier Mech Brigade into the mix. Figured we're here, might as well have a party and go for broke. The U.S. 5th and 7th Corps disengage from the line and move southeast before making an abrupt turn to the northeast and heading up into the Thuringerwald. NATO forces along the Czech border shift north, causing confusion along the Pact lines as they scramble to prepare to mirror the NATO move the next day. And as a little sidebar, while it sounds great from a narrative perspective that the Soviets had left the corridor open in their flank, Hell, damn near the entire left flank was left open. It was me who made that horrible error, and then I surprised myself when I switched hats to the NATO side and saw it. I completely ignored it as a Pact player because I was concentrating on just getting to the Rhine. When I looked at it from the NATO side, I was like, hey dude, you left your flanks open. It's funny how we can blind ourselves when playing solitaire. You get so wrapped up in making sure you're getting rules correct, you're taking notes, taking pictures, whatever, and you're pursuing your one single strategy without having a response plan to defend the strategy you're pursuing. I realized at this point as a Pact player, I'd pretty much chosen to ignore the Czech front and never really left the border and pushed NATO back. This would have done a much better job at preserving my flanks. It was the same up north. I'd written off the lone unit in Lubeck and left a 45-mile swath of East German plains wide open and inviting. Once reinforcements arrived, it was clear that NATO needed to take the gamble, since the Pact should have been to the Rhine within 1 to 2 turns, so I pressed on to Schwerin as the NATO commander. Now you couple this with an assault on Erfurt, and the war could be over this turn, since NATO can win by turning the tide and taking 2 Warsaw Pact cities. Yeah, it was a real head-slapper moment for me, too, when I realized I was so focused on trying to get rules right, trying to take notes, take pictures and all to do this AAR, and then, hey, I'm going to get across the Rhine. Here, I got the center breakthrough. I'm going to do this. Don't worry about the south. I've got the mountains there as a natural barrier, and those guys up north, they're never going to try anything. But in the end, I ended up outfoxing myself. Go Mo! NATO commits airstrikes on Soviet units who have the range to pursue them back across the border in defense of Erfurt. In the north, NATO does the same to the 2 closest Polish units who can move in to defend Schwerin. If these attacks fail, it will be the first time the Pact has had to take a defensive posture since the war started. And we'll start off with the southern front strikes first. The first strike is against 79 Guards tanks, 8th Guards. It is a 2 adjusted to the 1 for the forest, and that is no effect. The second strike is also a 1. Man, those Air Force jockeys just got themselves written off the 5th Corps Christmas list and right onto Santa's naughty list. And then we go up to the northern strikes. The first strike against the Polish P-12, P-1 is also a 1. What the hell? Did these guys train by correspondence course or something? Now at this point, I'm counting on these bad rolls to be actually good omens for the upcoming ground attacks. Multiple failed rolls I hope will lead to successes in those city assaults where it counts most. Well, at least my NATO half wants that. The Pact side is getting really nervous with visions of gulags swimming through his head. The second strike against the P-16T, P-1 is also a... yeah, you guessed it, sports fans. It's a 1. My crap rolls as NATO continue their streak. Well, I remind myself, there's nowhere to go from here but up. Then we move to the NATO combat phase. Who do we attack? Oh yeah, the cities. The assault on Erfurt will go first since this is the lowest attack on the docket. The attack is at 3-to-1 adjusted, with headquarters support and the city shift offsetting each other. And the roll is a 1. No, but that is what I was expecting. Actually, the roll was a 5, and that results in a CAD1R1. The counterattack cannot happen in the city with no defending units present, and the D1 means the city falls. Then we move up north to the Schwerin assault. The entire war effort hinges on this to bring the Pact to its knees. This will be a higher odds attack at 6-to-1 adjusted. The city and headquarters support shifts will offset one another, and what is initially at 11-to-1 attack is cut to a 6-to-1 with armor being halved when attacking into a city. Each unit's attack value is figured individually. So the 6th Panzer Grenadier armor is at 3, it is halved to 1.5, which rounds down to 1. Remember, attackers round down, defenders round up. The same for the 18th 6th Panzer Grenadiers, which is at 5, it rounds down to 2. So that is 3 plus 3 for the 11th Panzer Grenadiers, and you've got 6-to-1 odds. And the roll is... no, it's not a 1. It's a 5 again. The result is a D1 asterisk R2. The D1 is all that's needed as Schwerin falls to NATO like a house of cards, which is about what my defensive posture was as the Pact player, and it's game over, man. NATO ends the war in just 3 days with the auto victory. What was looking like a guaranteed Pact win gets flipped on its head and it becomes a NATO win. Let's take a look at the Butcher's Bill for both sides, and then I'll share some closing thoughts with you before signing off. The Pact lost 15 units, 3 regiments, 6 brigades, 4 divisions, 1 sea, and 1 air. NATO took very heavy losses. In total, there were 38 units combat ineffective or otherwise destroyed. 2 regiments, both the 2nd Cav and 11th Armored Cav, along with 36 brigades. The West Germans bore the brunt of the losses with 21 brigades falling in just 72 hours. And for my closing thoughts, half of me was happy to get the win, the other half was really annoyed at myself for overlooking something so painfully obvious. I mean, flanks, man, always watch your flanks, but hey, you know what, that happens. And it happens especially when you're playing a new game for the first time. And it was a week where I was getting a lot of distractions thrown at me too, from work and things like that. They kept pulling me away from the game even late at night. And I also made a bunch of rules mistakes along the way as I continue to learn the game. So a word of warning, do not take all of my actions in these AARs as gospel. Like I said, I made some mistakes and I'm going to do another one of these in the future and hopefully take care of all those mistakes. So the same thing when you watch any game, any war game that people are playing. Don't take all of the AARs as if the person is playing 100% correctly, because I guarantee you most people are not. We all make mistakes when we play them. So just keep that in mind. And that's how we learn, from making mistakes and correcting them. You learn from your mistakes and you understand that there will still be more mistakes made in the future. Although none as pathetic and public as outflanking yourself. I take the prize there. But overall, I absolutely love this game. There are a lot of layers to unwrap as you play. It's not necessarily a complicated game, but there are many steps, and orchestrating the whole thing can be complex at times. This game packs in a lot of fun and challenge, giving you a feel for the complexities of command without overburdening you with the minutia. You have several levels of things to consider each turn, with regards to movement, committing to battle, keeping units in both combat and movement supply, utilizing air assets, and I didn't even touch on chemical or nuclear warfare. I had planned to keep the scenario totally conventional the first time out so I can get a better foundational understanding of the game. In some ways I feel like I did, but I also know that I've got so much more to explore in this game. This runs the gamut from strategic to operational to tactical, and I've enjoyed every aspect of it so far, and know that I've got a lot to dig through with this one over the years of play to come. Bruce has done an outstanding job with this one, and I cannot recommend getting a copy for yourself highly enough. Well, thanks for sticking with me through this little AAR experiment of mine. I apologize for the mistakes made. Those are my own doing. I learned a good bit about the process of doing these AARs and plan on doing more of these in the future. As always, if you have any comments or questions, post them down below. Thanks for tuning in, guys. See you next time.